Hello and welcome back to another episode of Hear the Cannons. I am your host, Colin Hallboom, joined by fellow writer over at BucsGameday, Caleb Skinner, and our lead writer and editor, River Wells. Forgot my editor's name for a second there. Sorry, River.
It happens.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us, folks. While you're here, make sure you are subscribing to the channel. We've been getting a lot of traction lately on these episodes. We greatly appreciate it. Puts us in a better position to continue to deliver the content that I know you come here to find. And make sure you're checking out BucsGameday.com. That is, of course, Sports Illustrated's only website that's dedicated purely to covering the Tampa Bay Bucs. That is what we do 24/7, 365. Now, there are a ton of items. Now, we covered Logan Robinson and myself covered it on our instant reaction episode following Monday night's game against the Ravens. It was obviously a very eventful evening for all the wrong reasons. And yeah, I mean, the Bucs are coming off a heartbreaking loss, but it's not the same type of heartbreak they experienced when they blew that lead in Atlanta just a few weeks ago, eventually losing in overtime. But the kind of heartbreak that could potentially derail their chances of repeating as NFC South champions, let alone making the playoffs. And of course, they have won the last 3 NFC South titles. So, as we all know, though, during this game, 41-31 loss to the Ravens. Just 48 hours ago, the team's 2 best offensive players, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, were lost to injury. And although it appears Evans will be back at some point, we don't know exactly when. That's up in the air. Didn't look great. And of course, Chris Godwin lost for the entire season due to that gruesome ankle dislocation he suffered when he was tackled by Roquan Smith with less than a minute left in the game. A lot of questions coming in about Todd Bowles' decisions. I, for one, I'm not going to, in hindsight, blame him for having Godwin on the field. There were a lot of guys, starters on the field still. Personally, I had take more issue with the Evans situation because I think it was so obvious Mike Evans was laboring prior to that injury happening. Caleb, do you think Todd Bowles deserves blame for either of those injuries? And if so, why?
I think he has a little bit of blame to be placed on him for both. Actually, I agree with you. You know, not having 100% healthy hamstring in the first place is just asking for a re-aggravation. And even after Mike Evans caught that first touchdown to get him to 100 and make him the 11th receiver all time to ever do so, you could see that he was not 100%. He was hobbling. So it was tough. So putting him out there to begin with was not ideal. I don't think he should have been out there, especially in a game that pretty much didn't mean anything as it's an AFC matchup. And you have Atlanta coming in the next week, which is a bigger issue, and you needed that win way more. And then the whole Godwin thing, you can go both ways. Yeah, this team doesn't have any quit in them, but at the same time, you got to realize that at one point you're down 41-10 and then you're down 41-18. With as much time as you had remaining, the likelihood of that happening, the probability of that happening is very, very slim. And then you add in the fact again that this game didn't necessarily mean anything for the Buccaneers when it came down to it. And having Chris Godwin go down with under a minute remaining because you were trying to score and then kick another onside kick and then try to throw a Hail Mary just doesn't add up to me. And, you know, the question was asked by Scott Reynolds over with Pewter Report, isn't it his obligation to protect his players? And it wholeheartedly is. That is your job as the head coach, is to protect your players. And Todd Bowles failed in that fashion. But I get the whole argument of, you know, this team doesn't want to quit. They want to keep playing. But at the same time, when a player is injured, do you let him make the decision to go and play the game? No, it's up to you for the betterment of your team in the long haul to take care of them and take care of your team. And the Bucs would be in a much better position throughout the rest of the season if Todd Bowles did that.
River, my question for you is related to Todd Bowles as well, but I want to focus more on the struggles of this defense. I mean, record-setting offensive performances for their opponents these past 2 weeks. Obviously, we already mentioned the last time they played the Falcons, they gave up over 500 yards. Kirk Cousins lit them up. I mean, what is it going to take? What has to happen, I should say, for Todd Bowles' job to be in jeopardy? Or is it potentially already in jeopardy for next season?
That's a really good question. Well, we saw the little downturn that the Bucs took in 2023, right? And they climbed out of that. They ended up winning games, and they went to the divisional round and played a hell of a game against a Lions team that was better than them and took them down to the wire, right? If you have another downturn like this and you don't climb out of it, I think the defense is more of a problem than the offense. I mean, yeah, down Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, that's bad, right? We have Liam Cohen as a play caller. You can get creative, you get your pony personnel. It's going to be rough, but I think Cohen's a good offensive coordinator and he can make it work. Todd Bowles is the head coach and he's your defensive coordinator, and that's that, right? And we've seen the failings of this soft zone scheme for a little bit. It's popped up in certain games, but of course, never as bad as 500 yards and twice in 3 weeks. That's brutal. I think a lot of that has to do with the lack of speed, kind of on the defense with guys like KJ Britt who are a little bit slower and can't cover as well. And they keep talking about communication, right? At one Buck, we ask players and we ask Bowles, and they talk about communication. And it's interesting that that's a thing that's brought up a lot because a lot of these players have been in this system for a long time, right? They've played in it for a while. Anton Winfield Jr. has played in it for a while. Lavonte Davis played in it for a while. Even Yaya Diaby says we need to be better at communicating. And yeah, he's a second-year player, but he's been in the system for 2 years, right? So it's interesting to see how that's going. And if they have a really bad stretch here and they can't come out of it, if they're 4-6 for the bye week and the defense keeps giving up massive amounts of yards, then I think something's on the table. I don't know if they would really pull the trigger on that, to be sure, but it's something you got to think about when a lot of the problems that Todd Bowles is kind of wobbly to correct a little bit aren't getting fixed and they keep popping up in random places. That's something to look out for. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes, but I don't think it's a non-zero chance.
I have an interesting take on that too, while we're on the topic, if you don't mind. With the fact of how Liam has kind of taken over and kind of exploited on the offensive side of the ball and made the Buccaneers offense even better than it has been, last year. He's going to start being a name that's going to start being thrown around for head coaching jobs, in my opinion. And then with the blunders that we saw from Todd Bowles last year when it came to his head coaching duties, what just happened last week, and his defense continuously getting worse and worse. Is that going to be on the table depending on how the rest of this season, plays out? If it continues to go downhill, the defense continues to get worse, Liam starts to get these head coaching, opportunities, that becomes a difficult situation because do you say, hey, Bowles, like we've had our run, it's time to, hang him up and, give Liam that opportunity because we have seen what he's able to do in order to be able to retain him.
You had that variation kind of with Dirk Cutter and Lovie Smith a little bit. So it's not unheard of. And I think Liam Cohen will get some head coaching looks. And if that's really what they want to do, they really want to keep him. That's something to consider. But I think it's unlikely as of now, but it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. I think they should really want to keep Liam Cohen based off what he's done so far. Very impressive debut. He's been fantastic, and there's no other way around it. And because so much is going on, we're kind of sticking with the bigger picture stuff before we get into the Falcons a little bit. But what I want to, first off, guys, one of the unfortunate but defining features of this year, if we were to look back on it so far, are the injuries. And that's as paramount as ever based on last game, of course. But we're talking Antoine Winfield Jr., Kalijah Cansey, Luke Gedeke, Barton, Graham Barton, Jamel Dean, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Jalen McMillan all missing time. Really important players on both sides of the ball. Is it possible, and River, I'm going to go to you for this one. Is it possible for the Buccaneers to still make a playoff run? And if so, what needs to happen?
Anything is possible, but not everything is probable. I think with Liam Cohen's offense and the way he's called plays and the way his offense has been able to put up points, I think, of course, they can make the playoffs. And if they beat the Falcons on Sunday, which I think is less and less likely with these injuries, but if it happens, I mean, you're not in a bad spot, right? You got the 1-1 with Atlanta. You have a better record than Atlanta. You have a tough stretch until you hit the bye week. But after the bye week, you've got the Chargers, the Panthers twice, the Raiders. It's not bad, right? fixing these mistakes. And I've talked to Caleb about this, and I've talked to Logan about this. The Bucs seem to have one area of the game. It's been in the second quarter, the last 2 games, coincidentally, I think. But when they make a mistake, they freak out. They really fly off the handle. The mistakes compound. The discipline falls off, and the Bucs have like one of those a game, and even in wins, like remember against the Lions, they couldn't quite close out the game on that first 4th down drive, and then the Eagles, they let the Eagles get within a few points after going up big to start, and that's a coaching thing, right? That sort of discipline has to be fixed. They have to figure out a way to tighten up, and they did last year. They had to figure it out again this year. And injuries, of course, is the end-all be-all for any NFL team, right? It's whoever's healthy. And if the Bucs are fortunate in that instance, then they're fortunate in that instance. But going forward, there's a discipline problem and a communication problem, and that's really got to tighten up if they're serious about this, right? And I think Liam Cohen's offense can make it work. The defense needs a lot of work, but if you have a high-flying offense, you can mask a little bit of that. But they have to really be serious about this discipline and getting together and tightening up and make sure everything's firing on all cylinders and not just having these moments. It's these moments in games, right? Don't have those moments. If you want to be a contender, if you want to win playoff games, those teams like the Ravens and the Chiefs, they don't have those moments. So that's what it is.
Well said. And another avenue to ensuring that the offense continues to perform, Caleb, would be doing something a number of teams have already done, which is make a trade for a talented, established wide receiver. And I know you wrote a piece on this for us at BucsGameday.com, so check it out if you haven't. But we're going to, I want your opinion, right? Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Amari Cooper. These guys have already been moved. And another Cooper Kupp, is a guy whose name is out there. It's been well documented that Liam Cohen coming over from the Rams, they've moved Godwin into that Cooper Kupp role with the motion. In that sense, it's tailor-made, but is that necessary when we aren't sure about Mike Evans? What are your thoughts, Caleb, on the options that exist? And I want you to give us an answer of whether or not you think the Bucs should, in fact, pursue a wide receiver, and if not Kupp, who?
Yeah. Well, to begin with, that piece will be coming out tomorrow. It was a little bit delayed. Was really going ham yesterday there with about 6 articles myself. So I gave myself a little bit of a break and then being in the office today with work. But anyways, I don't think the Cooper Kupp thing is necessarily going to happen. If you do go and get Cooper Kupp, it makes sense on the outside looking in. But when you dig into it, River wrote an article earlier as well regarding this. But if you bring in Cooper Kupp, that pretty much is saying sayonara to Chris Godwin, because you're going to have to pay Cooper Kupp next year and then also again in the year after that, unless you restructure his contract, right? But the likelihood of Jason Licht spending a 2nd-round pick to go and get a wide receiver that's aging and has had injury concerns himself throughout his career is not very likely, considering what is going on, because a lot hinges on this Atlanta game. The season can go one way or another, dependent on that. But I do think they still need help, period. You're going to rely on a rookie in Jalen McMillan, Trey Palmer, who is a middle to late round draft pick last year. And then, Sterling Shepard, who was kind of out of the league for a period of time and just came back. And he's shown flashes, but you really going to rely on those 3 guys. And then maybe a Cameron Johnson comes back from his injury and whoever else you can throw on the field, and Ryan Miller maybe. So not really who you want to rely on. And then when you're looking at the NFL trade market at wide receivers, those tier 1 guys, if you will, are kind of off the market other than a Cooper Kupp. So you got to drop down to maybe a tier 2, tier 3. So you're thinking of guys like Mike Williams there with the Jets. You're thinking about Deontay Johnson there for the Carolina Panthers. So maybe Dave, throws us a bone here with that one or something like that. But Christian Kirk from the Jaguars, another name to monitor. Jacoby Myers with the Raiders. Some of these guys who have the ability to be maybe a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 that you could just slot in and be able to help in some sort of fashion. You also can look at a guy like a Darius Slayton, who really is not exciting to me. But then you have a young guy who plays up there with the Green Bay Packers and a Dontavian Wicks. He has issues with drops. We've seen it a lot this year, but he does score. He scored in almost every single game that he's played in this year. So he's a young guy. the problem with that is I don't think the Packers are really looking to be sellers right now at the NFL trade deadline. So that's the real concern there. But at some point, you're going to have to bolster this wide receiver group. And the only way you really know how to, or I know how to at this point in the season, is get there before, 2 weeks from now, before that NFL trade deadline on November 5th. So those are the names to watch. Yeah, they're not going to be the wow factor, but they'll help.
Fair. Okay, let's focus in now, once again, as we did a few weeks ago, on the Atlanta Falcons. It's a huge game for the Bucs. We've already mentioned that numerous times. If they have any hope of, righting the ship, forgive the obvious pun. Caleb, I'm going to stick with you. What do we need to know that we don't already know from a few weeks ago about this Atlanta Falcons offense? Is there anything that you think could be especially problematic for the Bucs, like it was when Kirk lit them up?
It's Bijan and Drake London. They're moving Drake London around a lot, getting him out and into open space and letting him do his thing. And then Bijan, it seems like they're using him a bit more here and getting him in the open space too, letting him just utilize his athleticism and his electrifying play to make those big splash plays. Kirk looks better than we saw, previously throughout the first few weeks of the season, and even when we played him. So I expect a better offensive showing on that side of the ball from them. Their offensive line might be a little bit healthier than the first time we saw them, but that's a game that we ultimately probably should have won and, lost in heartbreaking fashion because you weren't able to close it out. But I think at this point, especially considering, the injuries that the Bucs are having, Atlanta is the better team on paper. It's really hard to go against that, especially with the way Todd Bowles' defense has been playing, the injuries there. You might not have Tyke Smith, who's dealing with a concussion that he suffered last week against the Baltimore Ravens as well. Hopefully he can clear concussion protocol. So we have a guy in the nickel there, and maybe you can spot Christian somewhere else that is needed. But it's going to have to come to a group. Everybody's going to have to come together as a group and be like, hey, we got to pick each other up. We're going to have to play as a unit. And that's where that communication that River was talking about earlier on the defensive side of the ball. If you aren't unable to communicate against a Kirk Cousins-led team, he can dice you up. And we've seen it firsthand. So Kirk is still Kirk. And even after the Achilles injury, he can still sling the ball. You got to get after him. You got to bring pressure. He's not as good he's not as good against the blitz as he once was, especially with that Achilles injury that he was coming off of. He's not going to be mobile, not trying to get out of the pocket. So if you can get after him, get pressure on him, force him to get that ball out a little bit quicker than he wants to, you can force those incompletions. You can force those bad throws, or you can force those tip passes that can get picked off and create turnovers. The Buccaneers haven't been able to create turnovers all that much this year. Yeah, here or there, but not like we have seen from them in the past. And they need to be those game-changing plays like the Levante David interception that pretty much stopped the Eagles from potentially coming back. So you're going to need that a lot. And because they have playmakers on that side of the ball, and you can't forget about, Tyler Algier that they mix into that running back room as well. And then Kyle Pitts obviously had his massive game against the Bucs, and that's a worrisome area. We saw Mark Andrews do the same thing this past weekend. So definitely something to be worried about. They're not going to necessarily utilize the draw or the shotgun as much as they were at the beginning of the year, but that's really what you're going to be able to get.
And man, would I love to see Bowles throwing a little man-to-man behind some of these blitzes, because Kirk Cousins just annihilated that zone. He was just picking it apart all
we
game.
saw it early on against the Ravens that Bowles was sending people, and then it slid off. Then it was drop back in the zone. We're just going to kind of play base. And that's when Lamar was able to go crazy, get away from that pressure. Even when he was pressured, you got to finish. You got to finish those plays.
I'd argue a lot of that too, if you don't mind, real quick.
No, get into it.
This is a Todd Bowles thing too with his defense, right? You send a lot of blitzes and it works the first drive. You get Lamar down, he's sacked a few times. Then Todd Monken switches to the screen game, right? So he's using Justice Hill in that sort of way. He's getting those running backs out there. So that's a blitz beater, right? And honestly, I think for a while the blitzes kept coming, so the screens kept coming, and then that's how Justice Hill gets 18 yards into field goal range, stuff like that. It's the adjustments have to come quicker. I think they have to come quicker. If Bowles sees something going wrong with his defense, sometimes he's content to just let it happen, and I think that's not the way to do it. So did a better job of that against the Saints, in the second half, kind of adjusting to the bootleg. But I think those adjustments got to come a little bit faster.
Well, you got to Mike River. Why don't you tell us a bit about the Falcons' defense? I mean, the Bucs were able to put up 30 points, but they've been able to do that against some decent defenses this season, as we've talked about already. But specifically with the Falcons, what do the Bucs need to do to take advantage of the Falcons' weaknesses, or what are their strengths? Break it down for us.
Yeah, so they're decent against the run. They're 10th in the league at yards per rush at 4.5. But they're definitely beatable in the air, and I think a part of that is because their pass rush is not fantastic at all. It's really not been there. They're not generating a lot of pressure. It allows teams to kind of sit back and do their work, that's what Baker Mayfield did the first time they were in Atlanta. Despite a really talented secondary, Jesse Bates is a horror movie villain. Justin Simmons, also a fantastic player. A.J. Terrell is a great corner. But when you have time, none of that really matters, right? So really the passing game is going to be important, which is unfortunate because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin aren't playing. But I think the key to really beating this, because they might try and stack the box to try and account for Irving and Rashad White and Sean Tucker, although Irving didn't participate in practice today, so something to watch there. But you might need to use a lot more 21 personnel, get Rashad White out in the flats and the passing there, and that might work out. But as long as you have time, you can do damage. And Baker Mayfield's going to have time. The Lions are playing well. Pass rush isn't really there for Atlanta. So that's going to be how you have to attack them. And it's Liam Cohen's job to figure out how to attack that sort of lack of pass rush by passing without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So talking to Greg Allman from Fox Sports, he called it a mad scientist week for Liam Cohen. I think it's a great description of what he's going to have to do going forward for this game.
Yeah, if he comes out and lights it up with this group of guys, it'll be that much more impressive than what he's already shown us this year in terms of his sequencing, his play calling, just the way he mixes it up. It's been really fun to watch. Caleb, what is, there's got to be something, man. Find me an advantage the Bucs have coming into this game. Can you do it?
Yeah, I can. It's not going to be one position. It's not going to be one side of either side of the ball. It's going to be the Bucs special teams. The Buccaneers special teams is going to need to be on his P's and Q's, which means Todd Bowles is going to need to know when he needs to kick, when he needs to go for it. All these little intricate things, you've been seeing good returns from Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker. So, set up the blocks right, get something going there. It's going to be the special teams. You're going to need punts inside and getting inside of the 20-yard line. You're going to need punts inside the 10-yard line. You're going to need these type of things. You're going to need Chase McLaughlin to hit field goals when you get into those areas, because once you do get into field goal range, those defenses are going to buckle down, knowing that you don't have a Mike Evans and a Chris Godwin to kind of get you where you need to go. Like River said, maybe play a little bit more 21 personnel there too. So maybe get a couple more tight ends involved. Maybe this is where you start to see Devin Culp start to come into play. But still, that's not going to be a strength up against the Falcons defense, no matter which way you try and spin it. So special teams is going to be key in this game. And I think it does give the Bucs an advantage here because, albeit, Trent Gill is not a great punter by any means, but he's serviceable and he can get the job done. We do know Chase McLaughlin is probably one of the better kickers in the league thus far through the season. And so if, you put him out there and he does something like Austin Seibert did for the Washington Commanders early on in the season, and he drills 7 field goals and the Bucs defense hunkers down and they're able to escape with 7 field goals from Chase McLaughlin, then so be it, as long as they come out with the W. And I think that the Bucs do have an advantage in that area.
All right. I'm going to throw a couple matchups out, and I want you guys to tell me which will be what you believe is a more important matchup, a key matchup that I expect, like player versus player.
Sure.
Drake London versus Zion McCollum.
Always.
And Kyle Pitts versus KJ Britt. Which of those is more important, River, and why? Which one do you think is more of a key matchup for the Bucs?
In theory, it would be McCollum versus London because London does very well. However, KJ Britt has not been very good this year in coverage. And so with that being said, especially because the Bucs defense is really lapsing in the middle of the field, that's particularly where they're having a lot of trouble, and that's where a lot of tight ends do their work, right? Curls, posts, etc. Kyle Pitts was invisible for the first part of the season, and then once the Bucs play the Falcons, he had his coming out game. That can't happen again because you're already dealing with Drake London, and spoke to Zion McCollum today, and he mentioned knowing where he is in the field at all times is going to be really important. But you can't be dealing with Kyle Pitts as well, especially when he hasn't been doing well. And you don't want a guy that athletic in the middle of the field to be doing what he's doing. Basically, you can't have what happened the last time against Atlanta, right? So KJ Britt needs to find a way to not give up a lot of yards to Kyle Pitts. He's given up a lot of yards everywhere in general, so he's got to find a way to tighten up on that one. Yeah.
Fair. And Drake London, for anyone maybe who forgets, a few weeks ago, 12 receptions, 154 yards, and a tutty versus the Buccaneers. So yeah, real interesting. I want to slide into a little over-under game. I'm going to throw you each a prop. Are you taking the over or the under? A couple props are out for this game still. So I'm gonna focus for you, Caleb, first on a guy who I thought, and I talked about this in the instant reaction show, he really, really showed me something down the stretch, especially, and that was Cade Otton. With both those receivers out, just getting so gritty and tough over the middle, bringing those balls in, taking monster hits. I don't know how he got up from one of them, let alone like 3 consecutively.
Baker was not being as kind as he could have been, I think, in that instance.
Right. I was like, you're going to need this guy. So he becomes potentially like maybe a fantasy guy you want to own. All of a sudden, he's in that tight end one conversation. But his over-under is at 45.5 yards for this game versus the Falcons. Still a pretty big number based on what Cade Otton usually does, but he had 100 last game. So are you taking the over or the under on that?
Yeah, I'm not real sure what Cade did against Atlanta in the first matchup right off the top of my head, but I do remember what he did against them last year. And I know it's a different team and everything, but the Atlanta Falcons still aren't the best against tight ends.
He had 3. Sorry to cut you off. He had 3 for 44. He had 44 yards in that game.
So close, right? Like Vegas still has him sitting around there, which they've raised it maybe 2.5 yards with the absence of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Yeah, give me the over on that all day because Baker is gonna try and find him as much as possible. He knows he's like his safety net right now that he has. Probably him and Sterling Shepard is probably who he trusts most right now. And I think Liam is going to kind of scheme Cade open a lot. He's going to kind of get him these little 5-yard curls, these little 5-yard outs, just to get not only Baker in a rhythm, because usually you get Baker in a rhythm with Mike and Chris. You're going to need to get Baker in a rhythm somehow in some other way. So I could easily see Cade going over here for sure, over that 46.5. Yeah, easy.
All right. And while I have you, before I switch to River, because we got to get out of here shortly, what's your score prediction for this game, Caleb? What do you think? What's going to happen?
Oh Lord, I'll go Atlanta 24, Bucs 14.
Okay, River, I'm going to give you another tight end because we talked about the KJ Britt Pitts matchup already. What do you, sir, think? His line, Kyle Pitts, 41.5, less than our guy that we just talked about, Cade Otton. And I will refresh your memory as well because I did the same for Caleb. Pitts had 7 for 88 when these guys met in week 6. So is he going over or under 41.5?
And 88, I believe, is his highest number on the year for receiving yards in an individual game. And for that reason, I'm going to have to go over on this one. He's on KJ Britt. He was successful against the Buccaneers last time out, and I don't know how much Todd Bowles is going to edit this game plan. We'll see if that's the case, but you're not going to have Tyke Smith either. Sometimes he can help out with that, but it's unlikely that he'll pass concussion protocol in time for Sunday. With that all being said, I think Kyle Pitts might go over that number, so over.
Great point about Tyke not being in there, because that certainly would impact Kyle Pitts. Yeah. Freedom to roam those areas of the field. Give us your score prediction, Mr. Wells, please.
Oh boy. You know what? Every bone in my body is telling me to take the Falcons because it's the proper thing to do. They're better on paper. Injuries have hit the Bucs. They were really successful last time out. However, for reasons beyond even my understanding, I'm gonna go Bucs 23, Falcons 17. I think the Bucs need this one really badly. I think they understand that. I think Liam Cohen's going to come up with some crazy stuff that might throw off their game plan, given that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin aren't there. So they have a little bit of an advantage there, and maybe the Falcons not knowing exactly how they're going to, get around this. And I think with what the Seahawks did to Seattle, Kirk's been up and down. It's home. It's creamsicle. I think they're going to win it. Now, for the viewers at home, I have been very bad on our picks this year. I think I'm 1-5. So heed that warning, but I'm taking Bucs.
Well, I haven't been quite that bad, and I've also got the Bucs 27-24. I don't know. I think
Look at that.
Yeah, I think they might just, I don't know, find a way, and that sometimes that's all it takes. So who knows? Maybe a little bit of inspired football to in support of Chris Godwin. They've already been talking about trying to win this one for him. So there you have it, folks. So make sure you tune in right after the game or shortly after the game. We'll be going live with an instant reaction episode on Monday. We usually have someone live to join the show from Raymond James Stadium, so you can expect that. In the meantime, tell your friends, tell your family, BucsGameday.com every morning. Subscribe to the YouTube channel right here, BucsGameday on YouTube, and follow us all on Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, you see the handles. And with that, we'll talk to you soon. Go Bucs.